Hey, welcome back to week number 3 of Mind Games Life Group Study. We're talking today about reframing your mind. So we've been taking a few weeks here at COC and we've been talking about winning the war in your mind in a series that we've been calling Mind Games. This past particular week, we talked specifically about reframing your mind. So to recap a bit today, we've been referring to a psychological term called neural pathways. In short, we all have these things called neural pathways in our brains, which basically means that every time we think a thought, we're creating a new pattern or thought or new pathway. It's kind of almost like a mental trail in your minds. In other words, your experiences or your thoughts are wiring or programming your brain. So that means oftentimes we can get our wires crossed in our minds. We also know that our minds are a battlefield, and most of life's battles are going to be won or lost in our minds. And that's because your life is always going to be moving in the direction of the strongest thoughts, meaning what comes into your mind tends to come out in your life. Furthermore, meaning you really will struggle having a positive life if you have a negative mind when the wires are crossed. So the bottom line is this: if you don't control or can't control what you think, you'll really struggle with controlling what you do. So let's talk together today a little bit about how to reframe our minds. And let's talk about another psychological term that we introduced to you on Sunday. It's cognitive basis. It can also be referred to as a mental filter. A very simple definition of cognitive basis is this: it's a mistake in reasoning, and it's based on personal experiences or preferences. It's a mistake in reasoning based on what maybe you've experienced or what you prefer in life. We could also call it, like I said, a mental filter or a mental framework in your life. Now, knowing and understanding how this works in your life and in your mind, it's really important to you and your ability to learn how to reframe your mind. Because the filters that we have in our lives, they have a dramatic impact on how you and I see life. So we suggested to you a very, very important thought on Sunday. We said this: if you can change your filter, you can change the field. So to recap real quick, what's a cognitive basis? A cognitive basis is what we might call a default filter. It's when our brain is pre-wired to think in a certain way, or it's pre-wired to interpret a situation, even if our interpretation isn't completely accurate. This is why two people can respond completely different to the exact same situation. Meaning, don't miss this, it's not the facts that are different, it's actually the filter that's different. So what we want to do and start with today is take a few minutes right now, and we want to talk about this a little bit more in our groups. Let's talk about some things or some areas in your life where you might be seeing something completely negative because of a cognitive bias developed previously in your life. Go ahead and pause the DVD players right now and go ahead and discuss this amongst your group. In 1 Samuel 17, here's how David reframed. He remembered God's protection in the past in verses 34 through 35. He found God at work in the present in verse 45, and he acted on what God told him was, like last week, true in verses 48 through 49. In any situation, you can find the bad and you can find the good. It's just up to you. So now let's take a few minutes amongst our group and talk about the bad things that might be happening in your life and discuss some of the good things that are actually in the middle of the bad. You're just not able to see them. Talk about these situations in your group. Might be the best thing actually for some of us to do in reframing, because someone else's perspective, the way that they see it or might frame it, might be just what you need to see some good in the middle of your bad. Okay, so now let's take our remaining few moments together and talk about some of those suggestions that we gave you more specifically about reframing your mind from Sunday. The very first one is this: thank God for what didn't happen. In those bad situations in your life, I want you to take some time right now, and I want you to thank God for what didn't happen in those situations. Go ahead and pause and discuss that amongst yourselves. Here's the second suggestion that we gave you about reframing your mind. Stop pre-framing your failures. Now I want you to take just a few moments and talk about some areas in your life that you're already expecting the worst. Identify them and try to do your best to prepare for the positive in them. Go ahead and pause and discuss that amongst yourselves. All right, let's talk about the third thing that we helped you with in reframing your mind. We said this: find God's goodness in the bad. I want you to take some time to talk about how God really is working in some of the more difficult situations in your life. Okay, now that we talked about a few suggestions about reframing our mind, I want you to remember in closing today, if God is working in all things for good, which He promises from the Word of God that He is, then it might just be time for us to begin rejecting all the unhealthy thoughts, doing away with all the frames that are telling you you can't, or you won't, or that you're nothing, that you're a failure, that you're not smart. Because if you can do that, you'll no longer be passively receiving circumstances. You'll actually be actively interpreting them. This is not easy, to be honest with you, by any means. And there is no promise for immediate relief. But I can tell you this: it is your choice. And I can tell you that your choice is a lot easier when you can allow God to make it for you. So try and remember this statement as you kind of head into the rest of this week. It's personally brought me to a place of better spiritual perspective in my life and in my mind. It sounds like this: walking in peace is something that you will have to do on purpose. It is not easily obtained. In order to stay in peace, you have to learn not to worry, how to cast your cares on God, hardest part, how to humble yourself, and how to forgive and be merciful. Think about that this week. Let it go into your week. Let it infiltrate your mind and penetrate your heart. And I'm praying for you this week, celebrators. Go out there and reframe your mind.